Happy hello everyone! There are many ways that a country can measure its success. Some count the number of wars they've won, others the size of their population, and sadly some consider success by the number of reality shows they have about desperate housewives. But for most it is the economic indicator gross domestic product, or GDP. Ever since the Great Depression, economists have used this estimate of a country's goods and services as an indicator of how well a country is doing economically. But is there a better way? A small country in a remote part of the world thinks there is, and they call it gross national happiness.
My name is Ryan Wingfield, and my job is to make people happy. After years of doing stand-up comedy, I've devoted an entire year to the study of happiness. Join me each week right here on a Road Comics Road to Happiness.
High in the Himalayan mountains, there is a small country squeezed between China and India called Bhutan. It is an isolated place, occupied mostly by Buddhist monks. It's the kind of place where Bruce Wayne would go to train to become Batman. The place is so isolated, they didn't get television until 1999, which means they don't understand Seinfeld references. They also view money a little bit differently than the rest of the world, and in 2008 adopted Gross National Happiness, or GNH, as its social economic development model. The idea of GNH is something Bhutan has been tossing around for decades. Based on Buddhist beliefs, the idea is that a government will be more successful if it focuses on what makes its people happy rather than just counting how much stuff they have. So how exactly do you measure happiness on a national scale? Well, the exact formula is constantly being tweaked, but the Center for Bhutan Studies takes into account what they consider the 8 general contributors to happiness: health, mental, physical, and spiritual; time balance, how much family/leisure time you have; social and community vitality; cultural vitality; education; living standards; good governance; and ecological vitality. Basically, when the government has to make a decision, they take these things into consideration, giving them priority over decisions with a merely financial benefit. For example, let's say you wanted to cut down a forest to make lumber. In the United States, you would need to get an environmental impact statement showing that doing so wouldn't be terrible for the environment. But if you wanted to do the same thing in Bhutan, you would need to get a GNH impact statement showing that you wouldn't be ruining anyone's good time. Government resources are then diverted to projects that will improve national happiness the most. This doesn't necessarily mean that the government doesn't care about money, but is hoping that a focus on happiness turns into a long-term investment versus a short-term windfall. In theory, GNH can have a higher economic return, in part because happy workers are more productive workers, and they also cost the government less money. Less prisoners, fewer sick people, less police needed, etc. But does it work? Well, hard to say. In part because the policy has only officially been in place for less than a decade and Bhutan's economy is relatively small. However, from a purely happiness perspective, the policy can be considered at least partially successful. According to the 2016 World Happiness Report by the United Nations, Bhutan was in the middle of the pack for happiness, but was ranked #1 in the world when it came to happiness equality. Bhutan's own survey has found that those who consider themselves deeply happy has risen by 2.6% in the last 5 years. However, satisfaction with the government has dropped by nearly 50%. Don't expect any large countries to adopt GNH anytime soon, but Bhutan's example has at least inspired other parts of the world to begin tracking happiness. Aside from the World Happiness Report by the United Nations, similar monitoring of gross national happiness has begun in Canada, England, and India, which has recently announced plans to develop a Ministry of Happiness. Here in the United States, the Gallup poll began monitoring happiness in 2009 and developed a well-being index based off of the GNH model. So the government is at least monitoring happiness, if not doing anything directly to impact it. After all, we wouldn't want our government to be accused of actually doing something, now would we? That's all for this edition of a Road Comics Road to Happiness. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe and leave any happy comments below. Next week, would you rather have more money or more free time? Your answer may impact your happiness. Until then, stay happy.